Hello everyone, it's Chad Curtis here. For those of you in 415 that are going to continue on through the broadcast-oriented tracks, we'll get a little bit more into that in just a second. I will be the teacher of your next course, 552. If that is the direction you want to go, be sure as you choose the next level that you select 552 as your 550-ish level course. If you choose the wrong one and then try to get into TV or Journalism 620, which is the Advanced TV Reporting course, you will not have fulfilled the prerequisite. So be sure that you sign up for 552 if that's the direction you want to go. Your professors have asked me to do a quick tutorial for you on the basics of writing for, I'm going to call it broadcast for right now. I may call it broadcast again as we go along, and I'll explain why I'm clarifying that here in just a second. If you stop and think about it for a second, when we're talking about your writing, whether that is for a traditional newspaper, whether that is for a podcast, whether that is for television, radio, a magazine, whatever the platform is, if we're going to think beyond platform, we can think about style. And what I mean by that is you may have had papers where you had professors who told you you must use APA style or you must use ALA style. So when we're talking about writing style, we're talking about a very specific set of rules of thumb, best practices that over the course of time have shown themselves to be strong ways to make your writing more understandable. And ultimately, especially if you think about from a journalist point of view, if your writing does not get the information that is in your head transmitted to your audience in an effective way, you kind of miss the point. So let's talk a little bit about style. Why? If you stop and think about your who, what, when, where, why, how, the basics that you have learned for years to be able to get this information you need for your stories, those are critical, but the way you put them together to tell your story needs to change based on how it is that your receiver, the audience, is going to input your information into their body. Now, currently we have no way to smell news, we have no way to taste news, and we have no way to touch news. So that leaves two, eyes and ears. Okay? Now, when I talk about eyes, I'm talking about completely text-oriented writing. Not writing that includes you might have a magazine article that has pictures along with it, but as far as the writing is concerned, we're talking mostly about the type of writing that somebody is going to sit down and read. Okay, where those of us who work in audiovisual media differ is that our writing has to be written so that it works for the ear, so that the person who's receiving the information that the journalist has in their brain can input it through the ear and be able to get it, process it, and come to understand your journalism. And again, if they don't understand what you've just spent all day putting together, or all week, depending on what your project is, the whole thing is wasted. If at the end of the article, if at the end of the video piece, it doesn't make sense to the person at home, you just wasted a lot of time. Okay, so most of the instruction you've gotten at KU has been in writing for the eye, writing things that people themselves were going to read. That means things that they could start to read and then put down because they got a text and they need to answer thumb, 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 thumb. It could be that it's time for class, so they close the book and they go off to class. In terms of journalism, they pick up a copy of the Kansan, they put it in their backpack, and then when they get home, they start to read it, but then the roommates want to go out to Mass Street, so they put it down, and then they come back to it later. Those are some of the advantages that text-oriented journalism has. Here are some of the things that we have to be conscious of when we're doing writing for the ear. Journalism that people are going to hear, or if this makes more sense, that somebody is going to read to them. Okay? The first thing I want to talk about is stop and think briefly about what you hear during the course of the day in terms of information. And I'm not talking about other journalism. I'm talking about, what your frat's doing tonight, or, the sorority service project that's coming up this weekend. The style, again, using that word in that context, the style that you hear most often, that your ears are very used to hearing, is conversation. So when we write for the ear, we want our journalism writing style to be conversational. Okay? That means you're using words that you use in everyday language, and you're using them in the way you would use them in everyday language. I'll give it a very simple example. If you were writing and you wanted to use the conjunction that shows a contradiction between this side and this side, okay, you would say, I was going to go to the store, but I'm going to wait till the rain stops. Okay, you notice my conjunction there was but. Now, because you've been writing in academic style and to some degree AP style for probably the last 12 years, you have learned that in that more formal style, you would say, I was going to go to the store. I'm sorry, I'm not saying, you might write, I was going to go to the store, however, I'm going to wait until the rain stops. Well, however is not necessarily the conversational word. We would say but. Okay? So you have to think about what are the conversational words that you would use in your sentences. Put them together in a way that sounds very conversational. Why? Well, here's the thing. Very few people DVR the news. They sit down to watch it, or they click on a clip that shows up in their Facebook or elsewhere on social media, and start to play it. And basically they listen, and if in one pass, past the ear, one time, there's something about it that doesn't make sense to them, generally speaking, they don't rewind or slide back to start over again and to listen to it again, especially if you're talking about the things that are happening live, a live stream, a live broadcast, that sort of thing. You as the journalist get one shot at this ear. So your writing has to be constructed simply. Now that doesn't mean we dumb it down. We have very important things we need to talk about regardless of platform. But we do need to make the structure of our sentences simple. We're trying to get rid of the complexity that would mess up getting the information into your viewer's brain in one pass of the information. Okay? Now, the simplest construct, the simplest infrastructure that you can use in conversation is the subject, verb, object sentence. It's quite simple. Sally kicked the ball. That's very straightforward. You understand it immediately. Okay? We use action verbs. We want to avoid the to be forms of verbs because those make statements. We want to tell stories. So instead of saying there is a lot of destruction from the hurricane, say the hurricane destroyed a town. You see, the verb suddenly becomes a much more powerful because instead of using a to be form, I took destruction, a noun, and used its verb form, destroy, to create a visual picture in somebody's mind that I'll then couple probably with video that I have from the scene. Okay, so subject, verb, object. The other part of subject, verb, object that's very helpful is it keeps you in active voice. Now that's different than action verbs. Those are two different concepts. We want action verbs all the time. Active voice means that the subject is doing whatever the verb is to the object. So again, Sally kicked the ball. Passive voice robs your sentence of strength. It also tends to make it longer. And the way you make it passive is instead of saying somebody did this to something, you're saying something was done to this by this someone. Okay? So the ball was kicked by Sally. Or quite frankly, the ball was kicked. That is a complete sentence. It just leaves out who's the one that did the kicking. Why do we want active voice? Because it's simpler. It right from the beginning helps me to understand who is doing what to what or to whom. And so the active voice sentence is much more powerful. A very quick test that you can do. I don't want to get into, you look for the past participle form, blah, 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 blah. Your brain would just explode anyway. Let me just give you the test that we use in the KUJH newsroom for determining whether or not a sentence is active voice or passive voice. And it's quite simple. Read the sentence to yourself in your head, but when you reach the verb, immediately after the verb, in your brain, insert the phrase, by zombies. We call it the zombie test. And stop right there. If the sentence makes sense, that means that you have written in passive voice. The ball was kicked by zombies. It makes sense. It's a complete sentence and it grammatically, syntactically makes sense to you. That is an indication that that is a passive voice sentence. I'll use the other example now. Sally kicked by zombies. It doesn't make any sense. So that's an indicator that you have written an active voice sentence. Congratulations. A good journalist who's working in audiovisual platforms will take the time to go through their copy and test their verbs. And sometimes there's more than one verb in a sentence. So test them all to make sure that you're in active voice. We'll get into some details on how to fix active voice when you're in the next class, but at least for right now, recognize when it's in passive voice and try to turn that sentence around into active voice. Last things I want to talk to you about in this video are telling stories. Okay, again, our ears, we're used to hearing conversation, and much of our conversation is telling stories. We talk about getting the who, what, when, where, why, how of a story and sitting down and writing a story. Okay, well, that's true. But in the audiovisual platforms, when we talk about storytelling, we're talking beyond mere there are words on a page that I can read out loud, and more into have I composed what I'm writing in such a way that it tells the story of what happened. Okay? Lists of facts are boring. And that's what your who, what, when, where, why, how give you, are the facts that you need of the story. But they are not the story themselves. Here's an example that I use quite often. Let's say that I ask you to bring to class a plate of 24 homemade, and I'm emphasizing homemade, chocolate chip cookies, okay, for your next class. 24 homemade chocolate chip cookies. And so you went on your way, and the next time you come to class, we're all expecting 24 chocolate chip cookies. And you reach into your bag, and on the table you put a bag of flour and a bag of sugar and a sticks of butter and a bottle of vanilla and brown sugar and eggs and all the other ingredients that go into chocolate chip cookies. And you say, okay, class, dig in. Okay, well, That's how facts are when it comes to storytelling. They are not the story themselves, they are the ingredients from which you make the story. Okay? Those ingredients are important. We couldn't make the cookies without them, but we can't, nobody's going to take a spoon to a, well, I hope nobody's going to take a spoon to a bag of flour and then add a couple of chips on top of it and put a little dab of butter and those sorts of things and then just eat it like that and go, ooh, what a delicious cookie. It's not a cookie, okay? So how we tell the story matters. And our ears are very used to telling stories. Think about the way you would tell a traditional fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Little Red Riding Hood. She lived in the forest with her mother, and they lived along a path that went through the forest to Grandma's house. You would not do, there was a girl. She had a name. It is Little Red Riding Hood. She lives in a house. She lives with her mother. Fact lists are not stories. So, how do you combine these? You know, when I'm making those cookies, I start by combining the butter and the sugar, and then I combine the dry ingredient. Okay, so you get my point. How do we combine these facts in such a way that it makes for effective storytelling? The last tip that I'm going to give you on writing for the ear is just a really, it sounds simple, but it's easily skipped. And that is, read it aloud. Does it sound like a story? If it sounds like writing, it needs rewriting. If it sounds like it's conversational, if it sounds like you're just talking to me or whomever, then it makes sense that you are writing correctly for our style. So, read it out loud to yourself. You're welcome to read it out loud to somebody else. Now, recognize that you're not reading it out loud simply to make sure that your lips can form the words. You're listening to, does this sound like how I would tell this as a story? Thanks for taking the time to listen to this little, very tight introduction onto writing for the ear, also sometimes known as broadcast style. And just one final word, even those of you that are thinking to yourselves right now, I'm going into a text-oriented career. I don't want to have to worry about these sorts of things. Need to understand a couple of things. One is that many newsrooms are converged, and so you may mostly write for a print outlet portion of the newsroom. You might write for the newspaper, you might write for the web. But you also may have to do broadcast versions of things. Additionally, there are many elements of ear style that are more prevalent when your platform is social based. The traditional formal AP style feels clunky when you're blogging or when you're writing something that is more first person or something like that. So just understand that you may, you don't want to just gloss over this. No matter your future career in mass communications and journalism, this is a skill set that you're going to need to know, especially that when you are with a platform that is going to enter somebody's body through the ear, that the style needs to be different.